Let's now cross live to the NSFAS media briefing at the proceedings live in Houghton in Johannesburg.
Have and create an opportunity to deal particularly with those issues that affect NSFAS at the universities, and therefore extending and maybe elaborating from the discussions and the statements that were made by the minister yesterday. So that's the purpose of today's meeting. And yesterday, as we said, NSFAS was represented by myself and the executive officer, Msulwa Daka, and the general manager for loans and bursaries, Jomo Jacobs, who's here. We attended the minister's briefing as well as a meeting between the minister and the vice chancellors of all the 26 public universities. And the meeting was discussing the issues around the start of the 2016 academic year, as well as the implementation of the decisions of the presidential task team on short-term student funding challenges, particularly those that are facing the poor and the missing middle students. And the meeting was one of many stakeholder engagement initiatives we've had to attend as the National Student Fund Aid since 2015. And this includes meetings and workshops we've had with financial aid officers, the student leadership, the funders, the student bodies themselves, the government departments, the sector education and training authorities, the SETAs, the banking association, the insurance industry, universities, and TVET colleges. And we're working very hard to improve our stakeholder satisfaction across the board to build and maintain public confidence that will attract potential sources of funding from non-governmental organizations, the private sector, private individuals, all of which could be both local and international. And all of these different stakeholders, we believe, should certainly play a role in supporting tertiary education, but particularly support financial assistance to poor and missing middle students. NSFAS recently met with the student formations to outline the 2016 budget and processes. Just on the eve of the #FeesMustFall campaign in 2015, we had successfully completed the student leadership and capacity building workshops with all of the student representative councils at 50 TVET colleges and 26 public universities. And I just want to touch on the budget allocation, which was touched on by the minister yesterday. And as announced by the Minister of Higher Education and Training, Dr. Blade Nzimande, the NSFAS budget has been increased from 9.5 billion rand in 2015 to 10 billion rand in 2016-2017 financial year. Of this amount, over 700 million rand has been allocated for full bursaries in scarce and critical skills for the current year. This funding is made available through the financial aid offices at universities, and students who are enrolled in critical skills study programs, which include science, commerce, health sciences, engineering, and many others, should apply for this funding. The additional funding, which has been announced, actually was announced by the President in his January 8th statement to the nation, which is the 4.582 billion rand that government will allocate across the system, will provide, firstly, for loans of some 2.543 billion rand to assist 71,753 identified students who qualified for NSFAS funding, but were either partially funded or not funded at all over the 3 past academic years in 2013, 2014, and 2015. An additional 2.039 billion rand has been made available to ensure that any of the NSFAS qualifying students still in the university system in 2016 are supported financially to continue and complete their qualification. And this funding is in addition to the 10 billion rand that have been allocated in NSFAS in the 2016-2017 financial year. So in total, the budget that will be administered by NSFAS this year comes to 14.582 billion rand. And NSFAS has communicated the administrative guidelines with all the 26 public universities detailing the processes that are going to be followed for the disbursement of this 4.582 billion rand of additional funding. And I must say some of the rules which apply to this additional funding, for instance, include one, the fact that no NSFAS qualifying student who's been offered a place at a university, in terms of the university's enrollment plans, should be denied access to any public university based on financial need. Clearly, if students have not met the university's requirements in terms of academic progress, this has got nothing to do with us. And I just want to touch on the 2016 registration fees and the upfront payments. No student who meets the NSFAS means test who's been offered a place at any public university will be required to pay upfront payments or registration fees when registering for the 2016 academic year. We have already paid the universities and TVET colleges a total of 1.8 billion rand for the registration fees in advance for all of the NSFAS qualifying students already. So that money is already with the universities. And we expect that our universities will effectively implement this decision. We have trained all the financial officers, the financial aid officers on the administration of the funds, and therefore we remain confident that these administrators will be able to reinforce the rules of the scheme. A roving team of some 23 NSFAS technical personnel have been dispatched to support the TVET colleges and the universities who may be in need of any support during this period. Secondly, I also just want to talk about the administration of the historic debt. The historic debt, this was the debt that accumulated in the years 2013, 2014, and 2015 for NSFAS qualifying students. And this historic debt of all the students who qualify for NSFAS funding has been resolved. So there's the 2.543 billion rand, which will assist the 71,753 students who have qualified for NSFAS funding, who are either partially funded or unfunded at all. And this funding will be made available to those qualifying students who are studying in those years, in the 2013, 2014, and 2015 years. And these students would either have been unfunded or underfunded, and in essence, it means that that debt which they owe the universities will now be taken over by NSFAS. And the funding aimed at clearing this debt will be through a scheme which we have arranged in working with the universities and government, because there's a component of it which will be converted to a bursary, applying the NSFAS rules that we have. The balance will then be loans that are given to those students, again, using the terms and conditions which apply to all of the NSFAS loans that we have already in the system. And we've taken a decision as NSFAS that the administration of this historic debt will obviously go into the system, will pay the capital amount owed to the universities. The accounts submitted to NSFAS will have no interest charged, and any interest previously charged by the universities on these accounts should be reversed by the universities. So just to make it clear, all of the interest which was charged by the universities already on that historic debt has to be reversed. So we'll only compensate and pay the universities the capital amount that is owed to them, and then enter into agreements with those students. And NSFAS will pay for only the students that met both the academic and the financial needs criteria. And payments will be effected for students who are still studying, or those who have dropped out and graduated within the stipulated time in the academic years. Let me just talk about the role of the affected students. The message to students is quite simple. Government has made money available to clear the historic debt. However, to access this funding as a qualifying student, certain conditions must be met. Number one, a student should always be studying or should have been studying in 2013, 2014, and 2015 academic year. Secondly, a student should have applied for NSFAS funding during those years. Thirdly, a student should have been unfunded or partially funded by NSFAS during the 3-year period. And number four, a student should sign a new loan agreement form that would assist NSFAS to clear the historic debt. And obviously, there's a component which is a scholarship if they meet the academic success criteria, but there will be a component which is a loan which will be recovered in terms of the normal NSFAS recovery rules. And universities play a crucial role in the administration of this fund. And about 70% of the student population funded by NSFAS is assisted through the financial aid offices. And therefore, NSFAS will continue to work with the universities to ensure that they identify the deserving students who qualify for NSFAS funding. And the selection criteria based on NSFAS means test tool, which by and large considers financial readiness or neediness and academic performance, is utilized in this case. And the tool assesses the extent to which the student family can make a contribution to the full cost of study. And it assesses the financial position of the family in terms of the income against the cost of living to determine the relative expected family contribution, which is what we call the EFC, for that particular student. And in order for the student to be considered for NSFAS funding, they also have to make sure that the financial aid with all the relevant supporting documentation is submitted so that their expected family contribution can be determined. And students who are then ranked are those who at least are able to make a contribution to those who are able to, obviously complete their studies until such time that they, find employment. And they only start repaying the loans to the extent that they earn at least 30,000 Rand. And there's a formula which is included in the agreement that is entered into with the students. And we must emphasize here that NSFAS has sent a historic debt loan agreement form to all the universities to be completed by students in respect of those 3 years, the 2013, 2014, and 2015 year. And a separate agreement form will have to be completed in respect of this year, the 2016 year, for those students who are still continuing at the universities. And NSFAS will pay the universities upon receiving the completed loan agreement forms, and universities will work with us at NSFAS to ensure that there's sufficient communication to students and former students who meet the criteria for this fund. I now want to move on to the new funding model for poor and missing middle students. And I must emphasize here that that model is still being worked on, so I will not be able to deal with some of the details relating to the model. I'll just cover some of the key principles, perhaps in the questions and answer session later on. All I want to say at this stage is that the process to develop a new funding model, as recommended by the Presidential Task Team, has been put in place under my chairmanship as the chairperson of NSFAS. And this new model seeks to provide loans and bursaries to the current NSFAS qualifying students at universities, as well as the so-called missing middle. And the new model is planned for piloting next academic year in 2017, with full implementation expected in 2018 academic year. Some of the funds that we manage at NSFAS cover some of these specific areas, and I just want to touch on two of these areas. And the one is the disability funding, because very often, when we communicate in terms of the kind of different funds, and we administer about 25 different funds, the disability funding is available. In December 2015, we have approved a new and a more inclusive policy on disability funding. And working with Higher Education Disability South Africa, we have taken into consideration other forms of disabilities that may have crucial implications in determining and assessing the kind of assistance we should be providing in addition to paying for tuition and other allowances. And that information is available on our website and is available at our call centers. The SABC skills funding is the second category that I want to just deal with. The Human Resources Development Council, which is chaired by the Deputy President of the country, of the Republic, Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa, is developing South Africa's human resources strategy, which is identifying some critical and scarce skills which are required to support the National Development Plan. What is required is to better align the strategies of the various stakeholders to produce these scarce skills. And these stakeholders include the Department of Basic Education, universities, TVET colleges, as well as NSFAS on the supply side, and the employers and the programs which support entrepreneurships on the other side, on the demand side. And I just want to talk very briefly about the recoveries process. NSFAS loan book has the potential to inject a significant amount of growth to the pool of funds which are disbursed to students annually. All loans recipient of the scheme and society in large should be made aware of the importance of repaying their loans. Whilst there have been challenges on this front, much more vigilant and diligent action will yield positive results. And we've started the process already of improving efficiencies and the processes of recoveries and collections. And repayments of NSFAS loans can go a very long way to assist students who need financial support to further their studies at public and higher education institutions. The NSFAS board has put in place strategies in collaboration with other entities to recover the monies from debtors who are gainfully employed and can give positive consent for deductions from their payroll to make other acceptable arrangements to repay the loans. The aim is to improve how we collect and thus maximize the recoveries. And since the launch of the campaign in 2015 in October, we've already seen an increase from 12,000 first-time players who are already paying their loans. And this is very positive in as far as we are concerned. And the decision was made to make the repayment terms affordable because we know that the majority of our debtors come from low-income households. And interest is only charged 12 months after the student has completed their studies by either graduating or obviously if they've dropped out but have found gainful employment and they are already earning at least 30,000 Rand or more per year. And this means that a debtor who would start repayment at 3% of their annual salary, which increases to 8% or more when a salary reaches 59,300 or more per year. So the terms and conditions which apply to the repayment are really, really good. And for example, a beneficiary will pay back about 900 Rand a year on a salary of 30,000 Rand a year, or 84 Rand a month. And interest is charged at 80% of repo rate, which is the repurchase rate, which is determined by the Reserve Bank where they lend to commercial banks. NSFAS will continue to charge interest on all outstanding balances. It is therefore very important for beneficiaries to start repaying their loans as soon as possible. And in order to assist as many students as possible, we've improved our operations. And during the 2016 registration period, our contact centers operating hours have now been increased from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. in the evenings, Monday to Friday, as well as from 8 a.m. to 16:30 or 4:30 on Saturdays in the afternoon. In addition to the normal operating hours, 10 inbound contact center agents were employed and trained to assist with the student application queries. And at the moment, we have 38 agents that deal directly with all of the inbound calls. This has helped us a great deal to improve our service levels and as well as customer satisfaction. And since the beginning of the period of this academic year, we've received a total of some 25,076 calls, and we've processed some 19,000, just over 19,000 inquiries through our email system. So we're improving the efficiencies and how we operate. We have people on the ground working with the universities, especially the loan offices, to make sure that the processes of registration, the application for NSFAS funding, the administration across all of the activities of NSFAS is properly handled. Thank you for your attendance.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Now, I think we'll take some round of questions for the panel to answer, but I'm not sure if you've been given the statements. Can we just make sure that everyone has a statement? Let me start by observing the hands through questions, and just to introduce yourself, the station you come from, the media house. Thank you. We'll take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then we'll take another round. We'll take 6 questions.
Good morning, Chair. Karen Labuskapi from Tower FM. Just regarding this increase in the additional funding, if you can perhaps give us more details of how it has affected your work in allocating these extra billions, if there were any challenges or anything like that. And then also, we do understand with this piloting system that you are planning, that there are talks of perhaps bringing on commercial banks to establish public-private partnerships. Thank you.
Okay. Let's take a few questions and then we'll answer them at the same time.
Morning to the panel. My name is Jan Davnova from Eyewitness News. I know that the details of the funding model haven't been hashed out yet, but the concerns raised by the student leaders is that while they acknowledge the additional billions that have been injected, they say that by the way the scheme is set up, they're in debt by the time that they even leave university, which is precisely why they've continued their protest action and calls for free education. So I was just wondering if this new funding model will take such concerns into consideration.
Okay.
Good morning. My name is Batile Paladi from the Citizen newspaper. Chairperson, on accommodation, in most years and even in recent years, we experienced cases where students who are under NSFAS didn't have accommodation for almost 6 or 7 months. The money was only paid into their accounts in August. So they were struggling to really go to campus, traveling because they didn't have money. How is the back payment and how is it going to be resolved? How are they going to manage being on campus and traveling because they really don't have money? And my second question is on the students that have used NSFAS previously. You have mentioned that there are some that are paying, but I want to know what will happen to those that are not adhering to the promises of paying when they are now working.
Okay, next.
Chairperson, let's give you an opportunity to respond.
All right. The additional funding, just over 4.5 billion, and clearly has created additional demand for NSFAS, for us at NSFAS, to increase the resources that we have, as well as the capacity from human capital to our systems and so on. And we already have worked and are working with government to make sure that that capacity is available. I mentioned some of the additional resources that we're already making available to universities to support the universities, because in a number of cases, in fact in the large part of cases, a lot of students that may be owing universities in terms of the historic debt actually interact with the university. So that's why it's important for us to have the capacity on the ground there. But we've done the same in terms of increasing capacity at NSFAS itself, and we're busy doing that as we speak. So that has been taken care of. As far as the new model is concerned, and I will answer both questions, in fact, that deal with the new model. The new model seeks to address a number of things. It addresses the funding needs of students on the basis that the poor students, and obviously based on a relative means test that will be a lot more sophisticated than the means test that is very crude that we apply at the moment. So the means test will look at household income, we'll look at not just household income, we'll look at, for instance, where does a family spend their money, how many people do they have, how much disposable income do they have, and so on. And therefore, those people who, because we have cases, for instance, of a person who may be earning, let's say, 200,000 rand, but they have 11 children to support. It's not the same, the financial affordability of that person is not the same as a person who may be earning 150,000 rand and have one child. So we are going to build instrument and models to be able to, in a very scientific way, determine how much households can really afford. And therefore, for people who are poor, what we're trying to do, and obviously there are a number of things that would be required to really meet what is already, was the decision, for instance, in Polokwane, which is contained in the policy, of government, which is to make sure that we are making tertiary education accessible and affordable. And we're applying those principles across. And therefore, the level of subsidies, for instance, will be very depending on the income levels of the different people. And in as far as the consideration of the model for very poor students or students that come from very poor backgrounds, the model takes care of all of that. The second issue which the model tries to address, that we're building, is the issue of the high dropout rate of particularly the poor students, because our dropout rate is really high. So especially for students that come from rural areas and township and may find themselves, for instance, in universities that are based in the cities and so on, you need a lot more than just financial support. You need academic support, you need life skill support, psychosocial support, and so on. So we're trying to build a model where we will work with universities as well as other stakeholders in improving the success of those students. And thirdly, one of the problems that we've seen is a high incidence, especially of students from poor backgrounds, in finding employment. So we're going to work with all the stakeholders, including the private sector, to make it easier for students when they complete to find employment. So those are just some of the elements which are not currently in the NSFAS model, which are going to be in the model in the future. Yes, we are looking at a model that is going to leverage the funding that comes from government, particularly with funding that comes from other sources, including the private sector, the NGOs, both local as well as international. So the idea is to create enough funding capacity to fund poor students. And I must make it clear here that the model does not seek to fund students who come from wealthy backgrounds. So children who come from wealthy backgrounds are not going to be covered in the model that we are working with, particularly focusing on poor students and the so-called missing middle students. As far as the accommodation issues are concerned, let me allow my colleagues here to deal with the issue. And this also, and I'll touch on maybe before they do, the debt which is owed by people who are already working, who are unwilling to pay. I won't talk about people who are unable to pay because they may not necessarily be working. People who are unwilling to pay and are already earning income and are simply refusing to pay, who are simply going to be following the normal debt recovery process for those people in a way which is a lot more robust and a lot more efficient than what we may have done in the recent past. We'll follow all the processes that are determined by the National Credit Act.
Thank you. I'll answer the question on accommodation. And this does not only, it didn't only affect accommodation, it affects many other forms of allowances where students were in some instances given these allowances late. And we're working with universities to improve some of these processes as they currently stand. There are two things that NSFAS is doing. Is to work with the universities to improve this process, but some universities were claiming that they have got their own cash flow challenges. What we then have done this year is to advance to universities in January 1.8 billion rand, so that the university cannot claim that we don't have money, that's why we're not giving student books. That's one of the things that we're doing to resolve it. But at a much more systemic level, NSFAS is moving from a university-administered system to a NSFAS central administered system. That system has already started in few universities, and we're rolling it forward until 2018. We want to finish the rollout of that process in 2018. It will then help us to be able to control all those disbursement processes and make sure that we're able to disperse allowances to students on time.
Thanks, Chair. I just want to comment on the question raised by Zianda about the students saying when they start working, they're already in debt. You see, probably we should define that. We call this a loan, but if you really look at it, it's just a contribution back to NSFAS for having to have assisted you. I think the Chair has alluded earlier in the statement that would charge 80% of the repo rate, which is far less than where you can get any money anywhere. And for instance, if you go to university and pass all your modules of your first year and you're doing a 3-year degree, and we loan you 10,000 rands. At the end of the year, when you pass all your modules, 40% of that is a bursary. Now you own the scheme 6,000 rand, and the scheme does not charge interest. You go into your second year, we give you another 10,000 rand. You're going to pay us 6,000 rands if you pass all your courses. The scheme does not charge interest. You go to the third year, you pass all your subjects, then you don't pay us at all. So out of those 3 years, you now owe 12,000 out of the 30,000 given to you. And we still don't charge interest. We wait for 12 months for you to get gainful employment, or you can start getting a job, but we'll wait for 12 months before we start with interest. And still the interest is still lower. So that is actually a contribution to say, we have assisted you, we don't have enough funds to assist all our young people, make a contribution to assist us. That is why you've got the NSFAS CEO now, because we paid for him. I studied through NSFAS myself. The Director General of Treasury that gave us the money is a NSFAS recipient. So we wouldn't have those people in those positions to give us the money. We wouldn't be disbursing. I would be sitting here if NSFAS didn't make a contribution. We probably make a contribution in the lives of many other people, young people, who are making meaningful contribution in our country. So the issue of saying the students will be in debt, it's actually not actually the real debt. It's a contribution you're making, and this as a loan, I don't think it's even properly defined. If you also look at where NSFAS come from 1991 when it started with 7,000 loans, we are now going to be disbursed this year 12 billion, 14 billion rands, by the way, that we have. And out of that, if you look at our last financial annual financial statement, we given more bursaries than loans. So we are actually a bursary scheme more than we are a loan scheme.
Thank you. More questions?
Hi, Karen and now from Network 24 and beyond. These are just to clarify two things that I'm just not sure of. Where did the additional 4.5 billion come from? Is it from Treasury? Is it from the recovery funds from NSFAS? Or is it from the private sector? And then just as a follow-up question to to the new model when you said that it's not looking at funding wealthy students. Do we know how many students will benefit from this, or what percentage of the current student population will benefit from it? Thanks.
Thank you so much. My name is Rosendombinia from SABC TV News. While I commend the fact that US NSFAS has taken up the cry of the students who are complaining about the fact that they're not getting adequate funding, my question really is, why did it take so long for NSFAS to jump on board on the fact that we had to have a fees must fall protest, on the fact that you had to be given encouragement by the presidential task team?
I'm Bongani Nkosi from the Sowetan. So the Minister of Higher Education and Training last year indicated that the scheme would actually need 36 billion for varsities and 15 billion for FETs. But now we are talking about roughly 14 billion that the scheme has. Does this indicate that the scheme is still on a back foot?
Okay, Chair.
Yeah. Right. Let's just start with Karin's questions. The 4.6 billion rand is completely and 100% coming from government. So clearly the Department of Higher Education has already approached National Treasury, so they're working with National Treasury in terms of identifying exactly where the total amount has come from. So it is completely and totally government. How many students are going to be covered or benefit from the new model that we're working on? It's very difficult to determine at the moment because we're talking about a model that will be implemented in 2017. We have never really done, as NSFAS today, a means test of how many students are actually this so-called missing middle. You know, that information is still being collated, and as we build the model, we'll have a much better understanding of how many students are going to be covered. But also thirdly, it depends on where the cutoff point is going to be in the definition of the so-called missing middle. You know, I talked about the sophisticated means testing model that we are going to be putting in place. We still need to determine what do we regard as missing middle? What do we define that to be? So, you know, obviously at the moment, there are different numbers that are bandied about. You know, people talk about 300,000, others talk about 400. You know, is it 600,000? We still need to determine that. And that will have obviously a direct bearing on the number of students that can be covered under this model. The question on why did it take so long, I guess all of the issues that are being dealt with in the country today, especially those that pertain to tertiary education, are issues that have been given a lot more focus, particularly in the last 4 months or so. And this includes the functioning of NSFAS, the processes of where funding actually comes from, the funding of the tertiary education sector, and so on. So some of these things were already being looked at by government or NSFAS, and clearly what we've seen, you know, happening in the country over the last 4 months particularly has elevated the urgency of dealing with these issues. And this includes, for instance, you know, making sure that the efficiencies and the capacity at NSFAS is improved and so on. So I think the important thing is that a lot is being done now to address these issues. Bongani's question on, you know, are we still on the back foot? The total amount that the minister was referring to was a total amount that is required to cover not only the NSFAS qualifying students using the criteria today, which just using the means test is the 122,000 rand and less from a household income. He was referring to if we have to find money to cover all of the students, including the missing middle students. In other words, the poor students and the missing middle students, the total funding that will be required for that is in the order that the minister had indicated. So The 14 billion is still only covering the NSFAS funded students. In other words, the students who qualify for NSFAS funding in terms of the criteria that we use today. So the 14 billion does not cover the missing middle students. As was announced yesterday, all of the universities are working on programs that will assist the missing middle students. So that is not part of the 14 billion.
Thank you very much. There's still more questions? Got 2 questions. While I'm this side, I'll ask for Manel.
So are we saying that everyone who qualifies for NSFAS this year is going to be funded? We are not going to see, the trends that we are used to, that our students are being told that there's, this varsity and that varsity have run out of NSFAS funding, so we can't fund anymore.
Yeah, I can just deal with that question quickly. As a student, you have to have been offered a position at a university and you qualify for NSFAS funding for you to receive the funding that's been made available. So if, for instance, you had not applied, you were not offered a position, you may still come from a poor background, universities can't change the enrollment plans which they have, which they've agreed with the Department of Higher Education and Training.
And in addition, Bongani, one of the things that usually disturb registration is students that owe universities from previous years. All the NSFAS qualifying students as we stand now are all funded, not only for 2016, but for the previous academic years. Those that were either unfunded or underfunded in the previous 3 academic years are also funded, which means we won't have an issue where students are trying to register but can't register because they owe the universities, because the 2.5 billion rand is precisely to cover the debt that is owed by those students to the university.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just doing a follow-up on accommodation there.
Okay.
If I had correctly, they said that they will organize with the university to pay the money for accommodation earlier, to avoid students not having accommodation. Yeah, but the problem is that I'm going to talk from experience as well, because I was an NSFAS student. In universities like University of Pretoria, they don't have South Point that take students because they are NSFAS. They are private accommodation. If you didn't get rest, they are private accommodation which they need cash. They don't need arrangement from NSFAS. They need cash. They need to know, do you have money to pay monthly? So I would like to really get clarity on that. If you are a NSFAS student staying in DREP, how much do you receive for accommodation? And if you're a private student staying in accommodation, whether a room, whether a commune, how much will you be receiving each month, or as an allowance to pay your accommodation? Thank you.
Hopefully, Batlina, you've repaid or are repaying a loan. That's good.
Good morning, Chairman. Good morning, panel. I'd like also first to commend your office hours for extending their hours. They are on the ball, but for the website, there seems to be a bit of you applying online and it seems to be stuck. How do you deal with that?
Okay.
Good morning, Simpio Gomez Zulu from ANN7. I just needed some clarity on the 33,000 Rand the people who earn 33,000 Rand who will be expected to pay. What happens to those who earn less? Does it mean that you will be waiting until they can afford to pay that amount?
Okay.
Thank you. Over to you.
Right. I'll ask both my colleagues here to deal with the accommodation question, the website, as well as the income threshold.
Let me start with the income threshold question. Former students that earn less than the threshold don't have to repay, but they may voluntarily choose to start repaying, but they don't have to repay in terms of the schemes, in terms of the rules of the scheme. We are also looking at the threshold of 30,000 because it has been there for quite some time. But we want to encourage people to start paying as quickly as possible, even if it's small amounts. We think it helps the current students, because once they start repaying, we use that money to pay for the current students, and that's how the scheme is run. That money just circulates in the system. People like me were funded by the scheme, will fund the current students, and then the current students will fund the future students, and that's how the scheme is run. We're trying to circulate that money to help to assist more students. On the accommodation question, what NSFAS does in terms of setting up the rules, it sets the rules because we've got agreements with the universities to administer the funding on behalf of NSFAS. UP, for instance, will administer funding on behalf of NSFAS, take applications, apply the ministers, determine which students will be funded, and UP will get a basket, say 250 million. That this is the 250 million that we get from NSFAS. And therefore, from that point, then we'll say to UP, we as NSFAS will pay up to 71,800 per student. And therefore, the UP will then apply that 71,000 to all the allowances and tuition for the students. Say, give you tuition for so much, and therefore these are the allowances that can be afforded within that. But again, and again, as NSFAS, we will not set a price for accommodation, because the accommodation in Hatfield might not be the same as accommodation in the medical school in terms of pricing. We have to make sure that the university, which is much closer there, pays the correct price for accommodation, because we don't want to overpay for that accommodation, because that means we will not fund some students that we wanted to fund. I will ask my colleague to deal with the questions on the website.
We just to add first on the issue of accommodation and the new system that we're using. In I think more in the TVETs and some universities, that we have realized that, for instance, we gave 1.8 billion to the universities. Part of it is to make sure that registration is paid, and upfront in terms of allowances, students are assisted at the beginning of the year, and the process of claiming money from NSFAS has been taking the time that it will take a bit longer. So we came up with a new student-centered model where we make sure that immediately when the students get into the institutions and they are returning, we can pay allowances to students and for their accommodation through our SABC system. So that's the system we're implementing as well. We have looked at, and we've started a process of looking at our website, which is much more corporate and doesn't even allow students, because we're dealing our stakeholders, and our biggest stakeholders is young people, and they would want something that would, resonate with them, and they could get things much more easier to navigate. So we are working on that, and I think in the next couple of months, you are going to be seeing a new revamped NSFAS website.
Thank you very much. If there are no more other questions, are there any other questions? No. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming to this media conference. On behalf of the panel, I would like to thank you, and I would like to encourage those that studied through NSFAS to start paying, because we know you.
We're going to find you.
We are going to find you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
You just come until what is that?
11:30. Yeah, it's 10 to 11. So I can be a few.
Well, that was the NSFAS briefing, and Houghton in Johannesburg, giving some clarity in terms of the funding, but not as much clarity as I would have liked. Maybe you would need more, because they did indicate that the 14 billion rand, more than 14 billion rand, was for needy students. But the middle grouping that we're talking about, and that's the missing middle that is being referred to, has not been addressed in terms of how much money and how it will be allocated. There will be more coming out of that a little bit later. 14.5 billion rand 2.5 billion rand, we believe is for the benefit of the 71,000 students, and there was also just over 2 million rand for students that qualified. That's in addition to the 10 billion that was made available for 2016. Well, we'll take a break right now, and we'll be right back after that.